What is up, YouTube? Welcome to today's video, and we are going to do the league start guide for Venom Gyre Deadeye. Now, Venom Gyre has been a build that I've tried quite a few times now. I think I've started it the past 2 leagues after discovering it for some Reddit comment about how overpowered the interaction was and the shotgunning potential of Venom Gyre. And last league, it did really well. I think it was one of the most popular league starters from the very start. And it only kind of fell off because it wasn't the best at Sanctum. However, this time around, Crucible has a lot of mobs that spawn in kind of a circle around you. And Venom Gyre is going to be absolutely amazing because it will spawn a bunch of projectiles. And there's even a node from a mastery that can make Venom Gyre do an insane amount of damage while having the attack speed necessary. Now, in this video right now, you are seeing Venom Gyre take on Uber Maven. A lot of people have the question of, can you actually take this build and do Uber bosses? And with enough investment, and as long as you have enough damage and a baseline of defenses, all of the Ubers are possible, and you'll be able to kill them very fast. So you can see right there, that guy almost died. But as you can see, kind of a little bit of a more squishy build than what you will be used to, but more than capable of doing all the content in the game. So let's go straight into it. And for people who want to see exactly how this build is leveled, for my testing purposes, I actually tried leveling this build out, and I did level it. This is starting at Act 3 after doing the first lab, and it's an amazing leveling experience. If you want to check out how this build actually levels, you can go on my YouTube, and I actually have 2 full runs, or 1 full run all the way to Act 5, and another one all the way to Act 10, and it's very fast. I think I finished Gatava in under 1 hour and 15 minutes, and I'm not really even a speedrunner of any sorts. But you can definitely start leveling it pretty early on, and I did level with Rain of Arrows and Spectral Helix, and I will try to make another video about how exactly you can level this build. And let's go see some mapping footage. And mapping wise, this build starts off, and it is very strong in terms of mapping. I think mapping is definitely its strongest suit. It's capable of doing all the void stones with very little gear. But the main place that this build shines is this mapping clear speed. It's able to do most mods. It's very good Legion clear. It can do the deli mirrors super early on if you want to farm some deli mirrors. And as you can see here, this build, I think this is of a more league start scenario, and it has very insane clear, and it does scale the more monsters there are in the area. And in 3.21, there were a lot of changes. And if you're wondering how is this build compared to 3.20, and I do think the answer that you will receive is that this build is going to be a lot better compared to 3.20, and we'll go over why. So mostly, it's Venom Gyre is receiving additional projectile. It's getting the Crucible weapon passive tree. And there's also these new dual-wield bonuses in 3.21. And I do think that Venom Gyre on a 4-link or 5-link is the best clearing skill in the game, outside of maybe some bow skills like Lightning Arrow. And unlike Lightning Arrow, you can actually do either an Exarch on a 4-link without any additional gear. And there is a nice little bit of MTX. There's the new Venom Gyre MTX along with a Flame Wall MTX that makes this skill really aesthetically pleasing. Now, I think this time around, Venom Gyre is not really that unproven as a league starter. It was one of the most popular starters, and it was also the first build to reach level 100 in the last SSF race. And I should just tell you about how gear independent this build is. And Venom Gyre is also one of the only skills in PoE that has a 2-button component, because you shoot out stuff with your Venom Gyre and then you catch it with your whirling, or then you shoot it out again with your whirling blade. So what exactly has changed in 3.21? The biggest change in 3.21 is that I'm going to start recommending using 2 different variants. There's going to be a shield variant versus a dual wield variant. And from my calculation, so you can see dual wield variant, you go on a tree, you choose the dual wield variant over here. You can see the dual wield variant has around 4 mil DPS. If you change it to the shield variant, which allows you to get ailment immunity, and it also allows you to only have to use 1 claw, you can see it's around 3 million. So it's around a 30 to 35% damage increase to go dual wield. And the reason why dual wield is so strong is because on a claw mastery now, there is this note that says inherent attack speed bonus from dual wielding is doubled while wielding 2 claws. So this means that you have 20% more attack speed compared to 10% more attack speed when you dual wield. And you also get this new additional projectile on the tree, and this is completely new. This will make leveling a lot easier. It's called multi-shot, attacks, fire, and additional projectile. Now, it is a little bit harder to cap crit without the spell suppression mastery, so that's also another part of dual wielding, is that if you have bad crit early on, you could take Twin Terrors, which does help out a lot. Now, in terms of leveling, before I recommended doing Poisonous Concoction. However, I do think that Helix and Rain of Arrows is the fastest for Venom Gyre, even after the Spectral Helix nerf last patch. And they also changed some stuff up with the mark nodes. So before, these nodes used to be a lot better, but they now only give you 20% increased flash charges gain, and they added this over here, Mark the Prey, which is in a different spot. Even though this does end up being more damage, I do think that culling is way more important, so that's why we still take the culling nodes on the bottom of the tree. Then the elemental masteries have changed. There's no longer 15% all res, and there's no longer 40% increase of effect of non-damaging ailments, which is actually kind of bad for our brittle boots. But we are able to find a workaround for that. But this new thing that they added, this elemental mastery, where your hits have 25% chance to treat enemy monster resistance value that's inverted, it's actually super strong before you get Omni. So you can see it's a 25% damage increase for one mastery that is going to be up all the time. So there's a little bit of a give and take with the mastery. Some stuff is really good and some stuff is kind of bad. But basically, this is not really that much has changed outside of the multi-shot, the mark nodes being a little bit worse, elemental masteries being worse, but then there's also spell suppress lucky, which does help us out in capping spell suppression. So how does Venom Gyre actually work? And this is something that a lot of people don't really understand. But Venom Gyre is kind of like Spectral Throw. You fire a projectile that returns to you, and the returning projectile deals 75% less damage, and you can catch up to 30 returning projectiles. And for these returning projectiles, you can shoot it out with Whirling Blades. So for here, this is an old character. So you throw out these projectiles, and you'll see that you catch them, and then you have 30 right here. You shoot them out with Whirling Blades, and you can see the number goes down when you use Whirling Blades. Now, you have a 40% chance to keep the caught projectiles when firing them with Whirling Blades. So that's why you see 30, you use Whirling Blades once, it goes down to 40. Now, the big thing about these projectiles you shoot out with Whirling Blades is that they are actually fired sequentially. And what that actually means is when stuff in PoE is fired in a sequence and not all at once, each projectile can hit the mob one time. So you can shotgun the boss potentially with up to 30 of these projectiles at a time. And if you use Vol Venom Gyre, you can even get up to 50 projectile cap, and you can hit the boss with 50 projectiles in one Whirling Blades. Now, in terms of some quick math about how crazy that is that you can see the Venom Gyre projectile, when it goes out, has an average damage of 291k. So if you just say, oh, like 20 of them hits the boss, you can see that you can, in one motion, do millions of damage with just one Whirling Blades. So if it's 5 projectiles for roughly 1 million damage, if you hit it with 30 projectiles or so, you would be doing around 6 million damage in one hit. So that's why Venom Gyre's damage on PoB is not really accurate, because this only accounts for the throwing out projectile, it doesn't account for the returning projectile. And when you shoot it out, how much damage you actually end up doing is determined by your Whirling Blades attack speed and how many projectiles you're firing at once and how big the mob is. So that's why a lot of times you just want to generate as many projectiles as possible. So we are able to generate more projectiles with Sniper's Mark, because Sniper's Mark creates additional projectiles when it hits the mob with Sniper's Mark. You're able to get more projectiles with Awakened Fork. So when it forks, it creates an additional projectile or 2 additional projectiles of fork. And then Chain is the same way. So that's how we're able to get the shotgunning element, because we get so many projectiles with Sniper's Mark, Awakened Fork, and then when we use Whirling Blades on top of the boss, we're able to hit that boss with all of the projectiles that we ended up catching. So for Deadeye is the only Ascendancy I think that I would recommend playing Venom Gyre on a League starter. So we end up taking Tailwind first for leveling, because when I tried leveling with Venom Gyre, it actually felt kind of bad without Tailwind, because the Whirling Blade speed was actually so slow. Number 2, we get Ricochet, so we get that +1 chain, and this is because we want to get the +2 projectiles as soon as possible. And then lastly, for our Uber Lab, we get Focal Point. This is actually a huge damage increase, because Focal Point and getting increased effect of your marks also allows us to get more projectiles that spawn from Sniper's Mark. So super important. I think this is probably at least a 30 to 40% damage increase. Now, next up, the playstyle overall is similar playstyle to Spectral Throw. So what you want to do is you want to throw out all your projectiles, and once you see that you're near 30, you start Whirling Blade on top of the boss, and then you repeat, get the projectile, Whirling Blade on top of the boss a few times, and repeat. So something that a lot of people have trouble with is how do you actually Whirling Blades back on top of the mob back and forth. This is something known as name locking, so you can see right here. You want to make sure your Whirling Blades does not have always attack without moving checked. So what you want to do is you want to have this effect where you're going back and forth between on the mob. So you see how it's going back and forth on the mob. Now I kind of probably do a little bit too much damage, but here, alright. So you want to so you'll just have this effect where you're going back and forth on top of the mob, but you have to make sure that what's it called? You have to make sure you hover over the mob, you hold down your Whirling Blade button, and the name locking will force you to go back and forth on top of the mob. And that's how you actually are able to just one-shot rares once you start holding down Whirling Blades on top of the mob. So let's still find a rare real fast. Or maybe I should have just put in a map. Okay, so you can see right here, we'll go back. Oh, wait, we have a little bit too many projectiles shot out. Well, we just do too much damage on this build. So let's go into... let me just put in Searing Exarch real fast so you can understand exactly how this works. Because this is actually probably one of the most important parts of Venom Gyre and why people have bad single target is because they don't actually use the shotgunning potential correctly. So we don't actually have a totem, but generally you want to have a totem, and then well, this is character's old. So right now you see you want to throw out all your projectiles. You want to see that you have 30 cop projectiles, and then you want to go back and forth on top of the boss. So like that. This character, and then you just keep going, and that's exactly how you do it. This character is not geared correctly, but that is how you do it. And you see, when you use Whirling Blades, you are able to trigger the tornado. And this character doesn't have Flame Wall currently, but you just, that is the general playstyle, back and forth on top of the mob, and you have to make sure that Whirling Blades is not on always attack without moving, or this will not end up working. So back and forth on top of the mob, and that is the biggest tip I can have for you. So you have to make sure you're name locking correctly. You have to take a look at the number right here of how many projectiles you have, and there you go. Alright, so you actually cannot log out there, but that is the number one thing, is you have to name lock correctly. And for bossing, you want to pop Vol Venom Gyre. I don't have the Vol Venom Gyre on this character. And so basically, when you do mapping, it's a very, very good playstyle. You literally just throw out your Venom Gyres, and then you use Whirling Blades throughout the map, and then everything can die. Now, as I said, make sure this thing is not checked. Do not have this checked. And make sure to put on your Ancestral Protector Totem, and we will press Berserk when we have 50 rage, because we have Perma Berserk in this setup. So overall, this build scales with flat elemental damage. You get elemental damage %. You get attack speed on your jewelry, your weapon, and your jewels. And you do have 100% crit chances. It is a little bit harder to get 100% crit this time because of the removal of the spell suppression. And this time around, I don't want to get 100% spell suppression. Although some people hate not having 100% spell suppression, I do think that with the lucky spell suppress node, having like 98, 95% is honestly good enough for softcore. If you don't want to rely on lucky, you can try to get some spell suppression on some pieces and then unspec out of that. And we can run Determination or Grace as defensive auras. So while leveling up, I generally run Wrath and Anger because I like DPS, but most people, you can swap to the Determination if you feel like you're dying too much, and that does help you out by giving you some armor. And that armor should help you out a lot in terms of staying alive. And also, Elusive grants you 35% chance to avoid all damage from hits, and that's from the Nightblade. A lot of people don't know that Elusive is actually a huge defensive layer. You also have insane leech rate because you have life gain on hit with your claws. And if you go the shield route, you can get easy ailment immunity because you have ailment immunity on your what's it called, your shield. You can get ailment immunity on your boots right here. So overall, you can get 100% ailment immunity. Some people like to play with ailment immunity, some people don't, but I highly do recommend it if you want to stay alive. Now, next up for the Pantheons, we're using Soul of the Brine King. We use this before ailment immunity because it gives you freeze avoidance and also gives you some stun avoidance. After that, I would switch to Soul of Lunaris. This gives you some physical damage reduction, reduced elemental damage taken if you've taken damage recently, and chance to avoid projectiles. For the minor Pantheons, I would generally use Soul of Ralikesh or the ones that has reduced shock effect, or Soul of Yugo is also really good if you want reduced effective curses. A lot of this just comes down to what you want to currently do. So let's see, for here, Soul of Lunaris, and then this one gives you reduced effective shock. You can do it early game. And then this thing over here has reduced effective curses, so you can combine that and and get curse immunity on a flask. Now, next up, the skill tree. And the skill tree has pretty much stayed the same compared to last time. So right now we can choose the dual-wield variant. And I do think the dual-wield variant is going to be a lot more damage. And the dual-wield variant, everything is very, very similar, except I think I anoint the ambidexterity for dual-wield, because that just ends up being the highest damage. But multi-shot right here, and then I do take the attack mastery to have nearby enemies are intimidated while you have rage. And then we have the aura reservation from charisma. Now these are kind of some of these nodes I take because it's really hard to get the strength and imp for this build in order to get flame wall and to get anger or wrath all the way up, especially determination. So that's why like one of the first upgrades you can get for the build is honestly omniscience, because it makes the the stat requirements a lot easier to deal with. And this node right here is very, very important for leveling, especially. This allows you to not have any mana issues. A lot of people always run into mana issues, and this actually bypasses it. Now, once you get a lot of your stats worked out, you can drop stuff like Primal Spirit. You can also drop these stat nodes, but you do need a lot of stats, and you actually don't get that much strength and in on this build, which is kind of its one weakness. Now, for dual wield, we are using this claw mastery that has inherent attack speed bonus from dual wield double while wielding 2 claws. And for the shield variant, I think I swapped it over to this. This is around 30% increased damage on average, and it does help you out when the enemy is on low life. Now, the dagger mastery is this crit multi for skills while supported by Nightblade. And elemental mastery, we are taking the 25% chance inversion. And here, spell suppress lucky, critical strike mastery is crit multi against unique enemies. And overall, everything is more or less the same. The life mastery is kind of annoying now because we did lose 10% life, so this is only 50 life right here. And then we can't really take another life mastery unless your body armor doesn't have any life, and then I could take the 15% life. And elemental mastery, that's the only one we end up taking. And then the claw node, we go up here because crit chance is kind of a little bit scuffed now. Now, if you do have an evasion chest and you want to get some more spell suppression before you get the comb spirit gloves, you can use this to get 15% spell suppress. So overall, you do have a lot of spell suppress without much investment, and I think none of this gear really has any spell suppression besides the chest piece. And with just these points on the tree, you can see we're at 90% spell suppress with the spell suppress lucky node. Next up for the gems, the auras, we're going to be running a wrath, anger, determination, or grace. So anger, you can swap it out with determination or grace depending on how you feel about the build and how tanky you are. If you feel like you're dying too much, you can switch to determination or grace, and that will help you out a lot. And we want to run precision. Now, one of the biggest changes about the patch is that the aura reservation masteries are gone. So we no longer have the precision mastery right here. So we do have to find a little bit of a workaround. We do get accuracy on our amulet, and that actually helps us get 100% chance to hit. And the precision in this PoB is only level 11, and you have to lower it to find your perfect amount. You just need enough mana so that your mark on hit, Sniper's Mark, will end up casting, and that's the biggest thing to pay attention to. Now, your movement skill will be Whirling Blaze, Cast on Crit, Flame Wall, and Tornado. Tornado creates more projectiles to shotgun off of, and it works with Fork, and you can chain off the Tornado into the boss again, or having projectiles chain against the wall back into the Tornado, or something like that. Now, our buffs that we'll be using are Berserk. You can use Blood Rage if you feel like you want more damage. And Ancestral Protector is the totem, and it gives us an attack speed buff. For Cast 1 Damage Taken, we still want to use Cast 1 Damage Taken, Molten Shell, Hydra Spear for some exposure, and Tornado you can use for additional Tornado, and this just increases our uptime on Tornado. You can also probably swap this out with something else. So one suggestion I have is maybe you can do Cast 1 Damage Taken, Flame Wall, and then you can put power charge on crit with Whirling Blades, and that will actually give us the power charges we need. So you can see if we had the power charges, our crit is actually 100%, and it's actually a significant damage increase. So that's something to keep in mind. Maybe you drop the Tornado for Flame Wall over here, and then put power charge on crit here. And next up, we have Mark on Hit, Sniper's Mark, Mark on Hit, Enhance. And for Venom Gyre, I think the links you always want to run is Venom Gyre, Nightblade, Fork, Trinity, and then Inspiration. And the last link was Elemental Damage with Attacks, or Added Cold, or Added Lightning, depending on how much damage or flat damage you have on your claw and gear. Now, for the items that we'll be wanting, now this build is an interesting build because it does rely on the concept of having near perma berserk. So there are two different suggestions I have. And Comb Spirit, what it does is it makes it so that you regenerate 1 rage per second for every 100 life recovery per second from regeneration. So what this means is that when you have like 500 life regen, you'll get 5 rage regen. So how we get the life regen is we put on Vol's Vision, which gives us 400 life regeneration per second if no equipped items are corrupted. Now, something else you can do is you can use Immortal Flesh early game. Immortal Flesh does make it a lot harder to get the resist, but with the Immortal Flesh, you can see that it goes up to 8 regen per second, and that should allow you to have way more than enough regen to keep up Berserk for almost all of the time. Now, another solution you could potentially use is you can use a Stygian or a Rare Belt and get a T1 life regen. I think 5 rage regen feels pretty nice, but it does give you a lot of resist back because Immortal Flesh does have negative 20 resist. So it really comes down to how your resists look and how much rage regen you really want. But both options are perfectly fine, whether you want to go with Immortal Flesh or you want to go with a Rare Belt. And you should pay attention to the roll on Immortal Flesh because they can actually get pretty high. But basically, Comb Spirit converts all of the life regen to rage regen, and this is around 7 to 8 rage regen per second. Now, next up, we can see the Claw. What we want to use is any flat damage. You can craft these with essences, with either flat damage essence, with attack speed essence, or with crit essence. And I think this time around, crit chance is probably going to be a lot more important on the Claw, especially with the nerf to Brittle Boots. So next up, we have the Shield, and the Shield is something that helps you out with getting ailment immunity. It helps you out with your resist early on. But you can definitely see it with the dual wield variant and using the dual wield thing on the tree. The damage is definitely going to be a lot higher compared to the shield variant. And the dual wield variant kind of just blows it out of the water. But dual wield, you use 2 of the same claws. Now, the hard part about that is you have to find 2 of the same claws, or you have to make 2 claws that are really, really good, and that's kind of expensive sometimes. The chest piece, there's so many options for chest pieces. So usually you want to just scale the aura effect on the implicits, the Eldritch implicits. You want to get any life. And then if you're using a shield, you can use the Gravicious Craft, which is Fizz taken as like cold or Fizz taken as lightning. And you want some suppression if possible. You want some resist if possible, or armor and evasion. So a lot of different stuff that you can be looking for on a chest. And Comb Spirit. Next up, we have Boots. Now, Boots, you really want to have the... what's it called? The Brittle Ground. The Brittle Ground helps out a lot because if you look at here, it's the enemy on Brittle Ground, and you can see your crit is a lot lower without the Brittle Ground. So make sure you have the Brittle Ground implicit on the Boots. And next up, you just want some life. You want some resist. If you can get Strength for Int, that would be nice to help you out. You want Move Speed. But Move Speed, how high it is not really that big of a deal since we'll mainly be moving with Whirling Blades. And if you can craft ailment immunity, that will help out a lot in terms of getting the ailments we need. You also craft these boots with the essences that grants higher ailment immunity. Now, next up, we have the amulet. The amulet, you kind of need to have some sort of accuracy or flat damage. Life, crit multi is also good on it. You can also try to go for a Yoke of Suffering, and that's also a pretty high damage amulet. In terms of the anointment, it really depends. For the shield variant, I would not anoint Ambidexterity. I anoint Divine Judgment. But for the dual wield variant, I would anoint Ambidexterity, as I think that's the highest DPS equivalent. The rings are the same deal. Tamings are kind of the most damage efficient options. But you could also use a rare ring with elemental damage of attacks, life, and then you would also want to get some resist on it. But you generally need, I think, 1 node of accuracy from what I see. So you need one one modifier of accuracy in order to get 100% chance to hit. And next up we have the bell, and any jewel you want, any flat damage, life, attack speed, resist, anything that helps you fill out the character. So jewels, like I said, eventually this build does transition over to a cluster, and clusters are the easiest way to get more damage. So you can see when you could switch to the cluster variant with the dual wield variant. So let's go dual wield and cluster. You can see the damage goes up by quite a bit, nearly 50% damage increase, and that's literally dropping points on the tree up here and moving over the stuff to the damage. So you can see we have Feed the Fury, Martial Prowess, and then this is Wind Up, which helps us get power charges, and Fuel to Flight. You can also go for the more expensive clusters that have Fan of Blades, which gives you additional projectile. That's generally very, very expensive. Now, medium clusters, the reason why this setup is more damage is because you have Eye to Eye and Repeater, and these are very, very important for damage. Eye to Eye, Repeater, Eye to Eye, Repeater. And then Abyss Jewels, you want flat life, flat elemental damage to attacks, or attack speed. Jewels is % maximum life, % attack speed, and crit multi. Now, one thing that you can get for unique jewels is Storm Shroud, grants you ailment immunity if you get all of your, I think, shock immunity. And then there's also the Thread of Hope large in Ranger that helps out a lot because you get multi-shot. You can get this node, you can get this node over here. And I also think you can get split shots, but this Thread of Hope is going to be very, very expensive because a lot of bow people will be wanting to get it. Now, in terms of Flasks, what I like to use is a Divine Life Flask, Bubbling, and then this gives me CB immunity, so this is an instant heal. Utility Flask, I generally always go for Diamond Flask, Jade Flask, Granite Flask, and Quartz Flask. So Quartz Flask does give you a little bit of the suppression you need. And then this one, Granite Flask, some armor, and Jade Flask gives you the crit chance you need, and Diamond Flask gives you a % evasion. So you can see right here, you still have 45% evasion, and on the armor with the flask up, we should still have around, let's call it 15k armor, which will help you feel like you're not instantly getting killed. Now, as you can see, this build is not the tankiest build ever, but it should be more than enough to keep you alive. Now, overall, this is one of my favorite mapping builds, and I think you will be surprised at how much damage it does at a low gear level. And also, it's relatively safe mapping if you have a lot of cold damage or your crit base, because everything's going to be frozen or chilled around you. Bossing does require a little bit of knowledge. You want to know when you can spam Whirling Blades. For instance, on Maven, you want to make sure you're not spamming Whirling Blades and running into the thing that disables life recovery. And overall, the build should be stronger compared to 3.21, especially with the additional projectile. It's kind of hard to overstate how important this additional projectile will feel. And also the Crucible passive tree should be really, really good. I do think that it will add a lot of damage, especially the main reason why we're even going dual wielding is the potential to have 2 Crucible trees. And I do think that that's a very, very interesting option. I am really happy to see exactly what will happen with the Crucible weapon passive trees for claws. And if you want to figure out how to level the build, make sure to follow along. I think there's a leveling pod. I'll put the leveling pod below in the description too, along with a full endgame pod. So if you're ever wondering what it actually looks like at endgame, so if you fully deck out the character at endgame, it goes all the way to 50 build DPS. And this is really the power of attack build scaling. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more mirrors, divines, and mage bloods than me. Let me know down in the comments below if there's any problems with the pod, and I'll try to update it so that it can be of the benefit for everyone. But thanks for watching. I hope you have a great league start with whatever you choose, and see you next time. Bye.